A couple of years ago, I was very, very relieved and happy when I first met this term of liminal spaces and the conceptual idea behind it, describing a phenomena in life which felt very home to me for my whole life, actually. And I had no expression for it. I got acquainted to that. I kind of even developed an intimate relationship to it in all its various forms and shapes, but it didn't have a name. It was helpful to me to find that name, to get a kind of containment for a whole life. And going to the roots of it, which you might have done as well, it's describing a threshold and even a limit, a border sometimes. When we leave a kind of safe place, a well-known place, and enter into that unknown. And it describes the spaces in between. In preparing tonight's conversation, I recalled images from when I was a kid. I grew up next to the Iron Curtain in Europe. And there was this no man's land. Whenever we crossed over to the eastern countries, it was such an exciting moment to leave a safe space called home and enter the space in between. And for many years, it was just passing through, and it was kind of goosebumps, getting closer to the unknown of the new territory on the other side of the borders. And looking back, it was this amazing beauty, which exactly was in this space in between, and which we then later, when the Iron Curtain fell apart or away, we saw that this was the utmost abundance of nature in this space. Nobody has looked at that, but it was the remains were utmost abundance and a kind of sacred space for all sentient, all living beings in this space. So it showed the qualities which actually we all find in liminal spaces, and most likely you have had similar experiences in your life. So speaking about liminal spaces, we speak actually about a passage which comes with all the phenomena that are attached to passages, to places in between. And the interesting aspect is maybe not even so much the idea of the passage as such, but how we are, who we are when we are on that passage, what it does to our human being, to our becoming, and how we react to these phenomena when the trusted and well-known falls away and is replaced by nothing, no thing instead, which has already formed. So it is it's a kind of tapping into this no man's land. And usually it's not comfortable. This doesn't come easily, at least in the beginnings of it. And this was actually one of the sources of this topic tonight, was when we had a conversation about 3 weeks ago in a similar situation. And colleagues, people came up and said, oh, I often feel so wrong. So on the wrong track, and questioning myself, is it right where I'm heading to? Especially when there is no goal visible even. And many of, and one of the next steps was that because I feel this intention, I have this call within myself, which has no other form right now to express itself, but being in this no man's land. It yet got a form and a way to speak itself. And some of us then came up with an idea of, oh, I feel it, this feels familiar to me. And my approach was, or someone said, oh, I think I always felt like a Trojan horse, like not being able and allowed to show who I really am, what my message really is, what my intention really is. And speaking in the context of consulting and business, and seeing business as a major agents for change, as major players, which we address throughout our whole lives. We see what would happen if we ended that, if we would end the idea of being and feeling and acting as Trojan horses, but take the unknown, the uncertain, as a stronghold, and even taking the guts to take a stand into the unknown. And what would it need to do so? And Yang and I, we both share backgrounds in monastic lives, in Zen monasteries. And I often recall the moments when I was high up in higher altitudes, and we had these stepping stones. The whole monastery was laid out with stepping stones, and which mainly made sense in wintertime, when they were the only islands where one could walk high up in the Rocky Mountains. And these were the islands of stability, and the spaces in between where we didn't know how deep the snow was it slippery underneath? And then to take the opportunity to step into that not knowing, which is a practice has been a practice in our lineage as well. And we, whoever is engaged in a spiritual practice, this is for many wisdom tradition, a core essence of the practice is to be with the not knowing, with uncertainty. What shows in our life, and how does our life show when things are not fixed? Because we see that the idea of fixedness is an illusion. Everything is moving, is one of the core teaching in Buddhism. Nothing is stable, everything is impermanent. And not taking impermanence as a given for all sentient beings is a key source of suffering. So, and this is actually where I would like to invite you, Yang, to share your first ideas on, and you embody liminality in so many dimensions anyway. So what are your first takes on liminal spaces?
Thank you, Christian, and so good to be here. Hi from Seattle. Wonderful to be talking with all of you in Europe. I remember when I traveled in Europe, the temple gates, or the churches, right, were really something. Those liminal spaces, and in Japan, in Asia as well, those gates have they perform an alchemical function, where by the time we step to, and the idea of the sublime starts to enter. And the word limin is interesting because as with some other words in English, it embodies the opposite meaning at the same time. The sublime is also the highest, the transcendent. And so I do think liminal spaces is something very interesting as a gateway, as a concept for us to explore in our own lives. The thresholds that are everywhere in every day of our lives, and the very transcendent level of existence, of presence. For me, the experience of beauty, the aesthetic experience, have been a guiding light for much of my life. So I want to read to you this particular definition of sublime in aesthetics. It is a quality of greatness, whether physical, moral, intellectual, metaphysical, aesthetic, spiritual, or artistic. The term especially refers to a greatness beyond all possibility of calculation, measurement, or limitation. And I think it's interesting, it sort of juxtaposes the left brain thinking of calculation and measurement. The feeling of the aesthetic experience or of the sublime is an integrative experience. And I do think we experience that in every realm of our lives. We may not call it the aesthetic experience, but we can feel a sense of beauty or a sense of whole. And so to me, in work, in business, that's been something that has been helpful for me to navigate the more mundane liminal spaces. A little bit of my background, I come to the US at age 18 from China without much of the language. So the experience of being a young immigrant is definitely one of the shaping of ways of my life. So, and back then it's much about assimilation, right, into a new culture and wanting to speak the language well, wanting to go to school, become a young professional, succeed in the ways of this culture. And I worked both in corporate and in consulting, so also both sides of that. And then, but then understanding as a sort of zeitgeist of the culture is also changing, that I cannot leave my own culture behind. So I you know, I bring something that cannot be ignored, or, you know, we all lose something if many of us from a different culture do not bring that part of ourselves, right? Because if we're divided, every situation is divided. So in the workplace, I started to try to integrate these kinds of in-between situations. I worked as a director for international design at LinkedIn. So much of my team are people from places like China, India. We also did design for Germany as well. So everyone has the personal experience of being in liminal spaces all the time. Yet, what does it mean to bring it and have it actually show up in the way we communicate with each other at work? And how does it actually show up in the things we make at work? And so it was a fascinating journey that I had the privilege to sort of experiment with along with my team. And not just the cultural piece, although I would say, you know, sort of maybe in the US that the question of belonging is very, very prominent. So that's something I have been thinking about a great deal, but also between genders, between different ways of learning, between different spiritual backgrounds. So between personal and professional, or being a parent and being young, being different ages, etc., etc. We're always in transition. As Christian said, we're always in not knowing, even though we want to know, or sometimes we feel we know, but that's just only one part of our brain. A different part knows that we know much less. And so a lot of the journey is to be okay, to be in that threshold a great deal of the time, to know that we're honoring the transitions, the change, the emergence, from day to day, season to season, year to year, and the complete unknowability of the future.
Yeah.
I'll stop here.
What I really would like to dive a little deeper into is the specificness of the space in between, because when I recall the moments I feel in that space, my mind performs in a certain way. First of all, there's a massive kind of irritation. Things are different as they should be. a classic phenomena which people, myself included, report is phenomena like doubt, insecurity, the notion of being wrong, even the feeling of numbness, so the absence of clarity, not knowing where to look, where to move, what to do next, fear, even despair, and most of it resistance, the not wanting of it, is a core reaction of our cognitive minds, I would say. So, and what my experience is, or over time has become, is actually the more a kind of practice with being in that space evolved, is it became a moment of, or it tends towards moments of tranquility. Actually, it's like all of a sudden it's not a no man's land. It's a body in itself. It's a body in between, and it allows to look from a space of tranquility back and forth. So it reminds me to the moments of deep meditation, actually, when we kind of retreat from our mind and meet our minds, so kind of distinct ourselves from it, and get in a dance with observing and just presencing it. And this is where freedom and presence at the same moment appears. Actually, many people speak about is the source and the grounds of creativity and of well, actually, Shantina, our quantum physicist friend, would say this is potentiality at its utmost. How does it resonate with you?
Yeah, doubt is such you know, in Buddhism, we learn that it can be a very good signal. That's a path we should pursue. But in life, it's a very difficult practice to lean into doubt. But yes, I very much connect with that. There's a physical experience of that particular kind of doubt on whether or not this is something that is really ours to pursue, really our path. That is much fear and doubt comes up. But yeah, when we get closer, warmer to the path we should be on, there a lot of doubt comes up. Yeah, and so it's a good thing to be intimate with. Also, I think, you know, people often feel that eventually there will be less doubt, but it doesn't work that way. I think even geniuses have a great deal of doubt, and sometimes the more amazing of the work they do, the more trailblazing, the more doubt they have. I happened to be listening to a long essay about Cezanne, the painter, and his life was riddled with doubt and anxiety. He was tortured by it, yet he changed the world of art. So yes, exactly. He kept going despite the doubt or because of the doubt. And I think many people who are frontier, who expanded human consciousness have done that, but their lives are not easy. So that's something we should all be aware of. This path of exploration is not an easy one.
There comes an experience to my mind, which is many years back. I was traveling in the Himalayas in the 80s, and I spent some time in the region of Nepal, which is called Mustang, and this is the region where the burn tradition is placed. Burn is a tradition between Hinduism, a pre-Buddhist tradition, and the amazing and for me astonishing insight was on the holy or the temple in the tradition. And the altar is guided by two goddesses. First of all, they are goddesses, but I think on the left side was the goddess of doubt, and on the right-hand side was the goddess of contradiction. Actually, it was translated to me, and this was such a mind-blowing experience to me, coming from a Christian Today background, Catholic in my upbringing, where in the Western, rooted in a Western reality or paradigm, where everything was, at least everything which was pointing towards the divine or towards consciousness, was the path was plastered by clarity and by being right and by knowing of it and by explicitness. And all of a sudden it was just the opposite. It was just out, because if in a Christian temple, to my understanding then, doubt would be at the altar, this would mean, oh, you're on the wrong way. Turn around, look for clarity. And all of a sudden to me it seemed, wow, it's, oh, follow. What if they would be guiders and a guidance? So it could mean you're on the right track when doubt arises, when contradiction, when you cannot explain it. So follow that trail. And this was for the young man a life-changing experience, actually.
I love that. I love that. I feel like I want to put doubt and contradiction vertically alongside my studio door. It's certainly a very, very present existence for me.
Why do we think it's important to have it in the context of business and consulting? And well, first of all, I already mentioned it. I think it's we are facing or being with our clients. We see what kind of reality they face, and they face a massive accelerating world with no fixedness around. Everything is changing at tremendous speed, and they are in the midst of that turmoil. And in a one-on-one conversation, they are able to share that. We have no clue how to proceed. We live in the same world. We see we are hitting a wall. We see endless growth in an ending world, in a confined world, is not possible. How to proceed? And I think what we now see, even with the pandemic, is an additional ingredient that everything is upside down. So our idea is this is exactly where we meet our clients, and we ourselves dance in that same space. How do you relate to that?
Yeah, it's always a microcosm, macrocosm, right? Everything that happens at any level is happening at different levels, in some ways at the same time, and that is really how we can touch everything, is with what's happening right there. It's, you know, the personal, the team, the organization or company, the world, and every interaction, every dynamics, every tension, how we face that in that liminal space is how we change the tension or the dynamics on the whole, one situation at a time. But it happens in non-linear ways that it's very difficult for our left brain to grasp. But it is happening. You know, here in the US, you know, again, I think the culture or sense of belonging is sort of the door for changing the world right now. That's one of the main doors, is that the tension of race, gender, culture, biases, values are you know, changing the conversation in companies, in business, and it's fascinating, and it is, you know, I think some of the audience that I come to don't see the connection between something like race and sort of the history of the United States to what's happening now. But I think much of the audience are definitely understanding that however two people feel, whether there's some unconscious bias going on or power struggle, it is not separate from what's happening in the larger culture and from the history and from the bigger groups. We are not separate from the culture we swim in, and we're not separate from the groups we move in. We're all connected. And if we can have those connecting conversation of surfacing what's underneath for us, that increase intimacy, that changes the relationship between two entities. And that relationship has its own energy and has its own life. And that will change the relationships that we each have with others.
Mm-hmm. This is amazing. This is exactly what we witness when, because for the first time I'm now into this business arena for more than 30 years, and over the last couple of years, we could see that, in my words, suffering has reached the boardrooms. This wasn't the case 10 years ago, but now all of a sudden we meet a different kind of people, or different kind of awareness there, even to connect to these ideas and to connect to this, allow these conversations to take place. We are not separate. All of a sudden it does make sense. It's so, it was already has been, all of a sudden it seems to be visible. And COVID did its part, but not only COVID, it was that complexity showed we are, and you have Suez, and we see it on all possible layers, how interdependent everything is. And this is actually what CCG's core call is, to bring in this wisdom, this deep knowing of wisdom traditions together with economy, science, and the level of reality we face every single day, and to infuse it into as a source to overcome and to address the question.
And any one of us can be the instrument for change,
Absolutely.
Right? Consultants, facilitators, we model the integration moment by moment, and we can change the dynamics in the room, with the leadership team, with the company. It again, it's not linear, but it's and everything comes back down to how are we aligned, integrated, and are we comfortable with those tensions and those discomforts and those conflicts that it's a never-ending practice, but it's a fruitful practice. The more we are okay with the parts of ourselves, the discomfort within, the more we actually shift the energy.
Yeah, and that it is beginning with us. It's not out there any longer. It's not a change out there. This is the most surprising phenomena for me when we talk to executives. Many of them, all of a sudden, this was not the case for many, many years. It always was a change out there that had to happen. Somebody had to change their people, the markets, the world. And all of a sudden, it's like fruitful ground. It's the seeds pop up, seemingly. Some of them pop up in terms of, wow, it's about me. It's about who am I in this relationship to my world, to my people, to my company, to the markets. And this is a tremendous change and shift for us to be.
Yeah, it's an amazing time. Yeah, I think people, many people are so aware of the disintegration in themselves, and they're no longer quite willing to accept it.
So integration is your key gate to the moon we are all pointing to. What is integration in this? Would you like to share a little bit, the last word on that?
Absolutely. So liminal spaces, the thresholds, right? It's easy to conceive it as one side and the other, right? Binary, before and after, inside and out, etc. Something which gives a kind of a value system. And I was working in Silicon Valley, but living at the Zen Center, and some conceptual shifts happened for me on the meditation cushion, in that I started to see there's a different way to conceive of two things. So I don't know about Europe, but here in the US, people talk about work-life balance a great deal. And coming from the East, I never understood that because, we spend the best times of our day and our lives in work. What are you talking about work-life balance? Work is life. How can you separate the two? So so I've always kind of rejected that idea, and then somehow I came up with this idea of integration, which is the mental model. Instead of the balance, which is one side up, one side down, right? Something has to give. Integration is if you drop some ink, because I come from China, some Chinese ink in water, it swirls in the water so fast, right? And it has emergent properties. That pattern is unique every single time in all of history, right? But it quickly becomes inseparable. You cannot take the ink out of the water anymore. And really everything that we are, everything that we bring, that's a more accurate mental model for it. Mm-hmm. The cultures we come from, our backgrounds, our history, our inclinations, our values, our spirituality, that's the ink, and everything else that we are in, the culture we come in, the team, the work, that's the water. And it's inseparable. So go fully in, lean in, just like the ink. And
in a very different form than, yeah. Wonderful. I think this is a right moment to open actually the conversation to all of you.